Welcome back, Scroll and Sword. We just read Amos 4 through 6, and we see here that God doesn't just call his people away from sin, he calls them back to himself. And this should be a constant theme when you hear people teach about repentance. Repentance is turning away from something, but it is actually also choosing something new and walking towards that. So in true biblical repentance, God says, leave your sin, but come back to me. In Amos 5:4, God says, seek me and live. He doesn't say seek Bethel and live. Like, God is not calling them back to religious places. You know, Bethel is the house of the Lord in Hebrew. God's not calling them back to a church house first. He's calling them back to a relationship, seeking God himself. You know, Bethel and Gilgal and Beersheba were places tied to Israel's worship history, but they had become empty substitutes for true devotion. And you can keep going to sacred place after sacred place after secret place after secret place and still miss the God those places were meant to point to. We often create these religious substitutes in our life. Church becomes our relationship with God. A worship song becomes a relationship with God. You know, fishing on a boat, going to a beach, walking through a forest becomes a religious substitute to the relationship with God. You know, I heard James Luther Mays say this in his book about Amos. It was his commentary about Amos, that Amos confronts Israel's confidence in worship centers, places, because their pilgrimage sites had become places of false security. And when religious activity, you know, becomes your confidence, when going to church becomes your confidence, when reading your word becomes your confidence, when doing whatever, serving in kids, serving in youth, serving wherever becomes your confidence, giving to a nonprofit, it can keep you from real repentance. It's false security. And Amos is exposing the false security of Israel. And the wild thing that is in Amos, it doesn't begin with fix everything. It begins in chapter 5, verse 4 with seek me. The first step back to the Lord is not performance, it is pursuit. You have to return before you can actually reform. You cannot get right with God and then return to God. You have to come back to God, and he will get you where he wants you to be. And God warns that if they keep seeking the wrong things, judgment will break out like fire. What you run to for life can become the place where judgment exposes you. The invitation is still open, but it's not casual, because life and death are on the line, and God's mercy is absolutely real, but you cannot treat his call like background noise. It is an urgent invitation. It is a call back to the Lord, and you must heed the word of the Lord while you can still hear it. So Amos's his message to Israel here was, don't just return to your religious activity, return to God himself. So I pray for you today that if you've been slacking, or if you fell off, or if you've made mistakes, don't just return back to your religious activity, return to God. And that is the message that we need to tell everybody who is lost. Just return to God. All right, love y'all. See you in the discussion room.